Most of us picture Antarctica as a silent, distant expanse of penguins and research stations. But underneath that quiet image is a terrifying reality. This continent holds nearly 90% of all the ice on Earth. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that entire ice mass locked into a catastrophic chain reaction, collapsing completely over exactly 1 year. Look at this cross-section of an Antarctic ice shelf. Warm ocean currents circulate beneath, eroding its structural base and compressing centuries of melting into mere months. As the base weakens, the shelf splinters and drops billions of tons of ancient ice into the sea. But in that first month, you wouldn't see a giant cinematic tidal wave swallowing a city. Instead, you'd just see numbers. Global sea level sensors would begin returning data so high they break predictive models. While the public scrolls past news of a single flooded street in Miami, military planners are looking at a forecast that wipes out 50 deep-water ports within the next 90 days. In those rooms, the silence of the previous decade has ended. By the second and third months, the water arrives on sunny days. Coastal flooding starts happening constantly, entirely without storm systems to drive it. High tides alone become powerful enough to push seawater deep into urban streets and residential zones in places like Miami. The water creeps up over the rocky shorelines of Mumbai and never fully recedes. This is the new baseline. The sea is no longer occasionally visiting these cities. It has permanently moved in. Almost overnight, coastal real estate markets evaporate. Insurance companies freeze policies because it's impossible to price a home that will be permanently underwater in 6 months. Private airfields become overcrowded as families with liquidity move inland before the first official evacuation orders. For everyone else, those with local jobs, mortgages, and school-aged children, the rising water is a trap they cannot afford to leave. By month 4, the crisis hits the arteries of global trade. Modern civilization relies heavily on sea-level megaports to keep goods flowing. When those loading docks flood, ships simply cannot unload. Vessels sit anchored off the coast while essential imports, medicine, fuel, and food spoil in backup lines. This map tracks the immediate fallout across major global shipping nodes. Missing components from delayed ships force factories hundreds of miles inland to suspend production. Watch as those trade routes snap. International markets react violently to the sudden loss of commerce. Investors dump their coastal assets, and banks completely freeze lending to vulnerable areas. The global market stops functioning the moment it realizes that if the coastline is physically unstable, the contracts and debts tied to those ports are worthless. Modern trade has lost its ground. Months 5 and 6 bring a massive humanitarian nightmare. Tens of millions, and soon hundreds of millions of people simultaneously pack their cars and flee the drowning coastlines, gridlocking highways for hundreds of miles. The term climate refugee becomes the defining identity of the era, and the scale of this displacement is entirely new to human history. Every vulnerable coastline on the planet is emptying out simultaneously. Inland infrastructure buckles almost instantly under the weight of the influx. Schools turn into refugee dormitories. Sports stadiums are repurposed as food distribution centers, and small towns see their populations double overnight. As resources stretch to the breaking point, local residents resent the newcomers. Borders slam shut. Compassion slowly gives way to survival politics, and the sheer volume of desperate humans turns simple migration into chaos. In month 7, the threat moves from flooded streets to the global food supply. Look at this cross-section of a coastal agricultural field. As sea levels rise, dense saltwater pushes deep into underground soil layers, displacing fresh groundwater and wrapping around crop roots. The biological consequence is severe. As salt saturation reaches the surface, massive rice bilts die off, fish breeding patterns fail, and with transport lines already broken, the cost of livestock feed surges. By month 8, the disaster finally enters people's kitchens. Dramatic footage of flooded skylines is replaced by the personal, quiet terror of half-empty supermarket shelves and surreal prices for a loaf of bread. That hunger translates into anger. By month 9, localized food riots escalate into widespread looting. Governments are forced to declare curfews and deploy armored military vehicles to guard basic grain silos. No existing political bureaucracy was designed to move hundreds of millions of people while simultaneously securing the food supply. Governments were built to manage human crises, not the physical dismantling of the world map. By month 10, a completely new geopolitical map emerges. Land that was once ignored, rugged mountainous regions and inland rural areas with access to fresh water, suddenly becomes premium strategic territory. The wealth gap takes on a stark physical form. Billionaires retreat into high-tech, self-sustaining survival compounds carved into cliffsides, operating entirely independent of the desperate refugee camps sprawling far below. As month 11 arrives, an invisible consequence settles over the surviving population: widespread climate grief. There is a permanent low-grade mourning for the familiar world that now sits under the ocean. Children grow up internalizing the fact that the adults failed to protect their homes. This endless anxiety drives a surge in apocalyptic cults and a total loss of trust in tomorrow. Humans are incredibly resilient to physical hardship, but the human mind begins to fracture when you strip away its oldest, deepest comfort, the belief that the future is predictable. The 12th month arrives, 1 full year after the melt began. Civilization is still alive, but it is permanently scarred. Massive cities, childhood neighborhoods, and pieces of national pride have been surrendered to the sea. Yet, out of that devastation, we see brilliant, desperate adaptation. Engineers rapidly assemble floating modular infrastructure, while emergency desalination plants run around the clock to keep camps alive. Still, the sheer speed of the collapse proves a deeply uncomfortable truth. Our massive concrete cities, our shipping routes, and our mapped coastlines were never permanent fixtures on this planet. We were never truly in control. Our entire modern lifestyle existed purely because nature was patient. We lived entirely on borrowed stability, and one day, the bill came due.